thank you. I think it's important to start off by saying that we've got, you know, roughly 50 minutes for this workshop. This workshop could easily be, you know, a month long. So my goals for tonight is really to help those of you here who have very little experience with historical ceramics. Just get an idea, get your mind wrapped around how to identify them, what dates are they associated with, why are they important, and if we can at the end, I'll try and provide some context for why I think historical ceramics are so awesome. And I want you to be able to walk out of here and say, okay, I have this collection at my museum, or I have these artifacts now. Now I know what they mean to my site or my, my interactions with the museum going community. That's what we want to do here. So please ask questions. I myself am not what I would call a material culture specialist. I'm more interested in the social side. But I'm pretty friendly and easygoing, so hopefully you guys will feel comfortable enough to ask some questions. And if I can't answer them, I'll tell you, and we'll go from there. But I like this stuff a lot, and I think you'll be able to see when Caitlin and I speak about it, we really have a passion for this kind of stuff. Okay, so Caitlin is going to help us with understanding vessel shape. She looks at this stuff every day in the lab, and she's wonderful at explaining. So Caitlin, please.
Thank you very much. Okay, so when you start doing historical ceramic analysis, you're gonna start with a bag of ceramics that were all excavated from the same unit or feature. And so you might have a bag of like 100 ceramics. And so it's important to think about like, where do I start? How do I, it might look a little overwhelming at the beginning. So basically what you're doing is you're separating it into general categories, and then you take your general categories and make them sort of more and more refined. So each step isn't particularly scary. And to start, we're going to want to look at the 3 major categories of ceramics, which are kitchenware, tableware, and teaware. So kitchenware is everything that's used in the kitchen in food preparation. So think like a mixing bowl, a baking pan, or a big crock. Then tableware, that's the ceramics that you are eating off of. That's the ceramic that you're eating off of, or that is like being served from. And then teaware are the ceramics that are part of a tea set. So you want to start by looking at the color, texture, and the shape. And I always start by picking out the kitchenware because it's sort of the easiest first step. So let's look at kitchenware. So kitchenware, it is thicker, coarser clay. So you see that image on the right there. If you contrast the texture of the ironstone tableware versus the coarse red earthenware and the stoneware, the tableware is so much more smooth and more refined, and the kitchenware is sort of chunky and coarse. It's more of a functional object, right? It needs to be nice and thick so that it can sort of take a beating in the kitchen. Now, it's not just texture. Even easier to look for is color. So the kitchenware is going to be made out of red earthenware, buff earthenware, which it's the exact same vessel form. It's just slightly different color of clay. And then stoneware, which is going to be gray. So if you sort of pick out those pieces to start your analysis, you've already got sort of like one category taken care of. And we'll be going into more detail about the kitchenware a little bit further into the presentation. So next, separating out the tablewares from the teawares.
Come on, it's being obstinate.
There we go.
Excellent.
So tableware and teaware are made out of the same type of ceramic. So instead of texture and color, we're going to be looking at decoration and shape. And there's certain types of decoration that are almost always just found on teawares. So for example, on the right side there, that decoration is made with a cut sponge stamp, which is almost always found on teawares. And we can tell by the shape that it's a saucer. So there's a lot of details that you can look to that will help you further divide your refined ceramics. And scale is another really important one. So a teacup is always going to be smaller than a bowl. A saucer is always going to be smaller than a plate. And once you spend some time looking at the ceramics, these details are going to really sort of like pop out to you, and it's going to start to get a lot easier. So next, let's talk about form. So now that you've got your ceramic into your kitchenware, tableware, and teaware, you also want to look at the form of your pieces. And there's two basic forms. There's flatware and hollowware. So flatware, of course, plates, platters, saucers, and then hollowware, bowls, cups, or a big crock or a mixing bowl. That's also hollowware. And knowing the different terms of the parts of the ceramics is really going to help a lot, because that helps you communicate clearly about what you are looking at, and also helps you understand when other people are talking about ceramics and they're talking about the style of the rim versus the style of the brim. These are really good terms for you to learn. Another thing that I think is really important to look at here is if you have a small piece of one of these vessels, it might not be immediately clear what your form is. So for example, if you had a small piece from the side of a piece of flatware, it's going to be pretty curved, because plates aren't perfectly flat the whole way through. Flatware isn't perfectly flat, it's got curves. And then a hollowware, if you look at the base of that piece of hollowware, it's got some pretty flat bits to it as well. So you can't go based off basic shape alone. You have to look towards some other clues to help you figure out exactly what you're looking at. So next, all right. So I've already mentioned this can be a little bit tricky. So you want to look at the shape, and also, especially when you're starting out, decoration is going to help you so much. So I've got, everyone grab your vessels. Okay. So here's my teacup, right? Where's my decoration? It's here.
Okay.
So that is where you see a teacup. So that's where the decoration is going to be. Here's my saucer. Where's the decoration? It's here. So it's on the interior on flatware and the exterior on hollowware. So if a piece is curved and the decoration is on the outside, you've got a pretty good clue there that it's hollowware. Now this teacup, it's also got decoration right here, because you do see that when you're sipping your tea. That's something that you see most often on something like a teacup. And I just so happen to have analyzed the perfect unit to illustrate this concept.
Yay.
So we've got this piece here, and there was a few pieces all jumbled in together, and they're the exact same ceramic and the same decoration. They're refined white earthenware, and they're hand painted. But they're not the same vessel. And you can tell that from where the decoration fits on the piece. So this piece, decoration is on the outside, and then there's a decorative band on the interior. It matches exactly what this teacup is. It's got the decoration, and they even fit. So having your vessels, having your reference vessels out is hugely helpful. It will help you figure out those weird curves when you're looking at it and you can't quite figure it out. And then this piece, exact same decoration, but the decoration's on the interior. There's also a pretty good clue. There's a big foot ring on the bottom. So this is the saucer. So we've got the matching teacup and saucer, but we can easily differentiate between the two pieces. And those pieces are pretty easy because they're nice and big and you can tell what they are. But once you get your eyes used to what these different patterns and how they fall on pieces and how it looks different, you can tell a lot more. So like here, we've got this tiny piece. It's got the same decoration on it. Where's the decoration? The interior. So it's small, but I know this is a saucer. So it's sort of, look at where the decoration is. Think about how the shape makes sense on your vessel, and you can get a lot of information off pretty small pieces. Okay, let's talk about refining that further into specific vessel types. So we've got our kitchenware, tableware, teaware. We've got our flatware and our hollowware, but we're always trying to say more than just, oh, it's a piece of flatware. Ideally, we could say exactly what type of flatware it is. So one tool we use is our plate diameter diagram there, which we can use the angle on the edge of a piece of flatware and put it up against our diagram. And then we can figure out the circumference of the vessel. And so from there we can see, do we have a big plate? Do we have a saucer? Do we have a big platter? And then if we know we have a plate, we can also decide, is this the big plate that I eat dinner off of, or is it the little plate I have my snack off of? So you can really sort of dig in further there and learn a lot based off rims in particular. And similarly, not exactly the same, say you've got a bowl, you can figure out approximately what shape it is, what size it is, and refine from there. And we have a lot of different vessel types at ASI. Here, so look at all the ways that you can refine those IDs. I had, in that same unit, I had a little egg cup. See how it's like super small circumference and it's super squat? So there's so many vessels that you can identify once you start looking at these details. And then that just makes your whole ceramics catalog a much more useful document.
Yeah, for sure. And this list is overwhelming if you're not used to historical ceramics, but this is just a fraction of what's out there and what they made and was available to people in the 19th century. So if you think this is crazy, yes, I'm gonna say crappy, but I shouldn't say that in professional context. If you think this is crazy, it gets crazier. But this serves our needs and generally what we see in Southern Ontario.
Yeah. So I'll pass it over to Katie to talk about specific types of wares.
Thanks, Caitlin, very much. Yeah, so this is where it gets interesting, tricky, challenging, because we're going to talk about ceramic ware types. So you heard Caitlin talk about refined white earthenware. You may be familiar with terms such as creamware and pearlware. We're going to talk about how we can identify those in our collections, whether they be whole pieces in a museum or fragments that we get out of the dirt. But I want everybody to understand that when I talk about creamware, pearlware, and refined white earthenware, those are sort of artificial terms that are placed on wares that are in a continuum, because we're talking about the development of ceramics from the 1700s all the way through the 1900s here. And there's not like, okay, now we're making pearlware. Okay, now we're making refined white earthenware. it all slides together. So it's not quite as black and white as I'm going to present it tonight, but hopefully we'll get some idea about how you can start making choices. And those choices are important because a creamware vessel is earlier than a pearlware vessel. And if you're trying to determine the age of your site, that's your diagnostic, right? So that's the place to start. So let's see what we can do. Historical archaeologists love refined white or refined ceramics, okay, because they're so highly datable. The historical documents are plentiful. These are products of the Industrial Revolution. We have companies like Spode and Davenport, some of these companies that still exist today, that documented their recipes, documented their decorative types. We can go back to those documents and see. They're temporally diagnostic, like I said. So much research in ceramics has been done by collectors and enthusiasts. For example, if you go on the internet, you can find the Transferware Collectors Club. Now, transferware is a type of a ceramic decoration that we're going to talk about in a bit. But those folks who are collectors, antique collectors, have actually gone through and cataloged all the different images on their transferware and have provided dates because so many of them are datable. So that's for us to take advantage of, these guys. There's also often these complete examples that exist in antique shops, museums, or grandma or you might have some of these things in your own house. And the thing that's interesting, I think, which makes these ceramics so important for museums, is that these forms are instantly recognizable. People can connect with them immediately because they know how they functioned and they're familiar. So it's we really like refined earthenware ceramics, and they're white and shiny in the dirt and super easy to find. So this is the interesting thing is, you know, these ceramics are largely being produced in England. And then there's, of course, their manufacture date. And then there's the delay that it takes for them to get over to Upper Canada. So we can talk about manufacture dates, but what I want to talk about really is what is the generally accepted date range of those artifacts in Ontario? Because that's what's really important to us here. And tonight we're not going to talk about all the ware types. There are many, and there's more than this. But we're going to talk about the most common ones that you're likely to see. If you want to follow up and talk about some of these more rare ones, we can do that for sure. But let's just focus on this in our short time together. Pre-1820s ceramic types, I'm not going to talk about that much because we don't have many pre-1820 sites in Southern Ontario. I mean, other than Niagara and some places along the lake, really this stuff, you can find more of it in Quebec and in the East and maybe in Toronto, depending on the site. But these are some of the types: white salt glaze stoneware, Delft, some of you might be familiar with that term, and a lot of Chinese export porcelains, like the image here. This is a little hemispherical teacup. I mean, you recognize the shape. If you go into a Chinese restaurant today, you will get your tea served in a little hemispherical cup. So there's lots of different things that we're not going to talk about. What I really want to talk about today are the things that we commonly find. Now, the first ceramic ware type that we commonly find is known as creamware. Now, some of the first industrial spying that was ever done were people sneaking into China to try and steal the formula for white Chinese porcelain. And once it started getting exported, that was the rage. Everybody wanted a white ceramic because before they were using tin glazed earthenwares. And those have sort of a pinky tinge to the body, and the glaze was really thick, and it always looked kind of dirty or muddy. It was never a very white ceramic. So when they started trying to make a white ceramic in Europe, the first type that was marketed broadly was creamware. Now, creamware itself, how we identify it in the lab, is we will take a piece of creamware, or what we suspect is creamware, and put it up against a piece of white paper, which will contrast really quickly. You'll see that creamware is sort of a buttery yellow. Sometimes it's a greeny color, but it's clear that it's not very white. Now, the importance of this socially was that this came on in the mid 1700s, and this was when we started to get a really firmly developed middle class in Europe. They had money, Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution, of course, provided them with a inexpensive ceramic that they could have that mirrored what the rich people had. And this is one of the first things that sort of the middle class grabbed onto, was creamware. It comes in some different decorative types. See, we have the pictures down here in the bottom are transferware, but it's an overglaze, which means they were fired first, glazed, then they put the decoration on and fired them again. You can tell that a transfer print is overglaze fired if you run your fingernail over it, and you can feel it's kind of bumpy, and it's almost like you can scratch the decoration off. The lower left corner here are typically what we see. These are molded, only molded, so there's no color decoration on them at all. And some of these rims, they're called Paris rim, there's a Queen's rim. You see a lot of these actually out of the Fortress of Louisbourg have a lot of creamware. We have some hand-painted decoration in the upper right, and in the upper left there's hand-painted, plus there's what we call lathe turn, sort of decorative stuff here. So these things, speaking from, you know, a Toronto area chick here, we don't see these often. If we do see creamware, it's going to be very plain, undecorated. I don't think I've ever seen a piece of decorated creamware in any of our collections. Caitlin, can you think of any?
No. If creamware comes in the lab, it's undecorated, but we are excited.
Exactly. And it's important because of the standards and guidelines, because if you have a lot of creamware on your site, that means you have an early site, and that means that your approach to excavating that site is different than if something dates past 1830. So that's why creamware is important. So like I said, you know, this is a continuum. It's not black and white. So the next sort of major ceramic type that comes in is pearlware. Again, Wedgwood has his hand into this, as they did. You can identify pearlware. It has a slight bluish tinge to it, because I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the days when you added bluing to your white laundry to get it whiter. That's basically what they were doing. They were adding some cobalt into the glaze to try and make a yellowishy, buttery ceramic body look more white. And of course, this is the key, right? They're always working towards that Chinese porcelain white. This particular ceramic decoration here is only found on pearlware, and this is called old blue, what we call old blue. So in old blue, what you get is this just like cobalt blue is thrown at you, basically. And what the image is, it's almost like a negative image. So the things that in a normal transfer print would be sort of the dark lines, it's the reverse here. So everything is in sort of a dark blue background, and the details are light. So when you see this sort of transferware, this is also early. Pearlware is about, we start seeing it replaced by refined white earthenware around 1830, 1835. And remember that, you know, creamware is up to about 1820, 1830 as well. So your early sites are going to have probably both creamware and pearlware on them. Pearlware is more often decorated than creamware. So you will see these, this old blue, and they're beautiful when you get a nice piece of them. Okay. And here's some other decorative types that we see in pearlware. Now, ceramic ware types provide dates, but also ceramic decorative types provide us some dates as well. So when you put them together, when you have you can identify the ceramic wear type, and you can identify the ceramic decorative type, then you can sometimes even get a tighter date. So that's why it's important. And it's sort of hard in a workshop like this, where you guys don't have hands-on access, to try and put wear types and decorative types together so that it makes sense. So I'm going to try and do my best, and we can talk about it again as we go through. A lot of these decorations that I'm going to show you occur on more than one wear type. So it gets a little confusing, but don't overthink it. That's key. Don't overthink it. So what we have in the upper left is what we call hand-painted monochrome blue. Okay. And you can see what Caitlin was talking about. See, this is a little teacup. It's decorated on the outside. There's no decoration on this one on the inside. So you can imagine if you just had a shirt of this and you looked at the curve and you looked at where the ceramic decoration was, you're like, oh, okay, I get this sorted out. The bottom left is a very fancy hemispherical bowl, again, with an intricate transfer print. The center is a hand-painted early palette. So in general, there are two palettes for hand-painted. And the earliest palette, which is largely confined to creamware and pearlware, contains this mustardy yellow. Now, mustardy yellow is replaced later after the 1830s with black and red. But in the early painted ones, you see brown and you see this mustard yellow. So if you get a piece that looks sort of like this with this kind of interesting color here, that's
1970s?
Yes, I actually grew up with shag carpeting that color. So yeah, good for me. In the upper right, we have what we call shell edge or feather edge, and the green you will find in Ontario, and we know that green disappears around 1835. So when we get this to the lab, we get very excited because we know that that site is before or ish 1835 if there's green. And then there's the blue version of that. Now, edging occurs in red and yellow, brown, blue, green, but we mostly see blue and green in Southern Ontario. And the edging actually changes through the years, and there is a timeline, of course, because collectors do this, for what the edging looks like as you move through. But this particular sort of undulating edge is very shell-like with just those lines and just a quick hand-painted whoop around the outside. That is relatively early. So those are some pearlware decorative treatments that are common, very common. I want to talk a little bit quickly about blue willow, because blue willow occurs from basically the earliest transfer print, and you can still get the stuff. And it comes in a range of gaudy and exciting colors, and many people really love blue willow. So this is an example. I think this one, according to collectors, is an 1814 date on this plate, although I can't confirm that. But so this is a transferware. And what happens in transfer? Why do I keep saying transferware? So up until the transferring process was created, the plates that you got were hand painted, and they took a long time, and they were expensive because you had artisans who were hand painting your plates, obviously. So what happened is they started engraving copper plates with these very intricate designs, and they could have been based on anything, artists' paintings, or this one was sort of obviously a chinoiserie sort of feel to it. So they'd engrave these copper plates, they'd ink the copper plates, put a piece of tissue paper over that inked plate. They would take that inked tissue paper, put it on an unfired ceramic, and then put that into the kiln, and that ink would sink into the plate. And it enabled them to make these very complex, intricate designs quickly. I think there's actually a video on YouTube where they talked to one of the last transferware makers, and it was probably recorded in the 70s, but you can see all the steps that occurred, and it's incredible. And to me, I look at it and I think that must have taken forever, but these people were turning out these plates, boom, boom, boom. because they were usually paid by the plate. So that's how they created these things. Now, the interesting thing about Blue Willow is obviously everybody goes, oh, well, that's a Chinese pattern. Oh, nay, nay. This is completely the product of what people in Europe thought a chinoiserie plate should look like. This is not based on anything Chinese at all, except for the elements that put together. Now, there's a story that was made up here. You know, it's a young man and a woman running away, and the father's chasing them, and in the end, they turn into lovebirds and fly away. This was extremely popular. It has no basis in Chinese myth at all. And the interesting thing was this became so popular that Chinese pottery makers actually started making the willow pattern. And that's amazing because Europeans were stealing Chinese motifs for decades, and then it's gone back. And I think that's an interesting story to close the loop. There's my ramble about Blue Willow. You can still get it, and if you go into like a Chinese restaurant, I know you can still eat off Blue Willow plates, which I think is amazing. So we've gone through the pearlware. Then the next major refined earthenware type is RWE. Some people call it whiteware for obvious reasons. It's definitely more white bodied than pearlware. The cobalt was not added to the glaze, it's added to the actual clay. So again, that bluing makes the white pop a bit. And you will see an incredible variety of decorative treatments on RWE because they've got to the point where they've figured out the chemistry for what colors they can add. They've figured out how to quickly do it. They figured out how to easily interchange different pieces of transfer print on different plates. So it's absolutely incredible. You see RWE in a million different vessel forms, and it's almost always decorated. If you have a piece of RWE that's not decorated, it's probably just because it's that tiny undecorated piece of an otherwise decorated vessel. So some common decorative treatments on refined white earthenware. Upper left is a hand-painted late palette. So you'll see that the orange is gone and there's no brown. So what you get is black, red, the cobalt blue. That is super common. That's probably one of the most common things that we find. Again, you see the shell edge or feather edge continues on. These are some cups and saucers that are decorated with what we call sponge decoration. So you take the sponge, you dip it in your color and you dab, dab, dab. It comes in many different colors. Sometimes like the one here, you get a mix of colors, and sometimes they can be quite gaudy and amazing. The upper right is the transfer print. You can see this one is, again, this is quite intricate transfer print. And we also have this vessel in the lower right, which is what we call factory slipped. So factory slipped in general, they would have taken the fired pieces and then they would have added just a clay slip. So that's a very thinned out clay solution. They'd have a special sort of cup that would hold the solution, and the people would either turn the vessel on a lathe or hold the vessel and dribble the slip onto it, then they'd fire it. So you'll get lots of different combinations of treatment. So this one down here on the right, this sort of loopy thing in the middle, we call it cabling. Sometimes it's called earthwormed, and we have banded. There's lots of different kinds of decoration that's similar to this. But one of my favorites, and I always like to tell these stories, is the one in the top middle. That's factory slipped as well. And so the top treatment here, the little circles, that's called rouletting. So they basically had a little, almost like a pizza wheel, but it was flat and had a design in it. And they'd take that pizza wheel and they would run it around the edge of the unfired ceramic to make a repeating pattern. And you will see that often in factory slip wares. But that sort of beautiful sprig on that yellow field, that's what some collectors will call mocha ware. Some of them will call it fern. But the interesting thing about that is, for me anyway, because I have a sick mind, that color is produced by using a combination of urine and tobacco juice and adding it to a slip, and then it bleeds out. How they figured it out, I don't know. I don't ask those questions, but I love that sort of little detail about things.
Trial and error, I would have guessed.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine that their life would be that boring, but bless them, they made something beautiful out of something not so beautiful. So again, like you can see that there's such a variety of decorative types. It can be overwhelming, but we can break them down and you can get a general idea. You know, really, there's sort of 4 or 5 basic ones. You have an edged, you have the hand painted, you have a factory slip, you have transfer, and then you have sponge. Those are the major ones in the mid-19th century. Well, in the mid-19th century, they figured out transferware, and boy, howdy, did they love it. They put it on everything. They have combinations of colors. They have, you know, things like the purple plate on the top is basically completely covered in transferware, or you've got, in a transfer print, and then you've got some, you know, that have more white field. They were competing, these companies were competing with each other. Sometimes they were stealing each other's patterns. They were marketing patterns based on what was happening during the day. So if we had an explorer that went to the Arctic, or we had an explorer that went to Africa and encountered some new and interesting animals, you can bet that was going to show up on plates. It was their TV, right? They had art that they could buy easily, and they decorated their tables with it. So yeah, this is my own crazy collection, which I like to look at it. It's really silly. But you'll see one of the things that you should take note of for those of you who deal with sites that tend to go a little bit later is the color of blue here is very important. It's a very bright cobalt blue color. And you can see it's pretty standardized, that blue color, across all the ceramics. When you move out of sort of the 1850s, the transferware sort of dies out. It goes out of favor, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But it has a resurgence in the late 1800s. So the 1880s, 1890s, transferware comes back, and then it comes back in like 1910s, 1920s. But you don't get this same cobalt color anymore. So if you have a piece of transferware that, you know, looks pretty white, yeah, it could be an RWE, refined white earthenware, but the transferware is a teal color or maybe a navy blue color, you can say with a pretty high degree of confidence that that's going to be a later ceramic. So that's probably going to be 1800s into the 20th century. So you're looking for, if you want cultural heritage value or interest, for those of you who are archaeologists, this sort of cobalt color is the one that really is going to tell you that your site applies under the S&Gs and has importance. So the next ceramic ware type that comes on the scene is ironstone. Now it's made in the 1840s, but it really doesn't get going in Ontario until the 1860s. Ironstone is actually one of the first ceramic types that was made in Canada. So I think some of you may have seen ironstone tureens and things that have a beaver on the top. Those are actually made in Canada, and one of the first sort of large scale processing of these sort of ceramics, because most of these other things are straight from England or Scotland. Ironstone is heavy. It's almost steely blue sometimes, or gray blue, very light color to it, but the vessel's heavy. You might have experience with wheatware. This is our series pattern, which is similar to this picture on the side. So it's interesting because you have that proliferation of colors in the 1830s to 1850s. Ironstone comes on the scene, it has no color at all. In fact, some of the early ironstone is just paneled. It doesn't even have any interesting molding like the wheatware here does. It's just they call Gothic shape. It's very angular, paneled, almost severe looking compared to the previous stuff. If you were to hold a sherd of ironstone and a sherd of RWE, you know, you might feel like, depending on what vessel the RWE was, might feel about the same weight. However, if you were to have that ironstone and hold a piece of creamware or pearlware, you'll notice that that ironstone has some heft to it. It was made to take a beating, and it was made to travel. And if you ever work on the prairies, you will find a lot of ironstone. And ironstone then goes through this time where it's, okay, now it's Gothic, it's paneled, it's pretty severe looking compared to previous. Then it becomes more graceful. You get these interesting patterns like daisies or different sort of agricultural themes, because it's meant for the prairies and agricultural peoples. And then it goes back to transferware. So it makes all that travel back to transferware, and eventually it gets into the 1880s, 1890s, and you get a lot of brown and black transferware that occurs on ironstone. Okay, tricky part here is that these ceramics, up from creamware all the way up to ironstone, and I'll talk about semi-porcelain next. If you turn them over, some of them will have maker's marks. There'll be a transfer printed mark, which often tells you the name of the pattern. It might tell you a registration of the pattern date, which is a special funny little symbol that it looks like a little triangle, and it's got a lot of weird numbers. It takes a little deciphering, but it's fun. It also may have the wear name. So you might find things that Caitlin and I would call whiteware or refined white earthenware, that's actually called ironstone, or it's actually called semi-porcelain, according to the manufacturer, right? But technologically, it really is more of an RWE, because we got to remember, these guys are marketing this stuff and they want the new thing. If you can call something semi-porcelain, and if people are going to go, oh, porcelain, yeah, that's what we want, they're going to latch right onto that and buy it. So when you're doing analysis, don't be confused if you turn it over and it says semi-porcelain, but you're looking at it thinking, oh, no, this feels more like RWE. You're probably right. So keep that in mind as you do your analysis and think about what's going on. So here are some forms that occur in ironstone. You can see what I mean by the central image. It's a very heavy looking paneled, that's sort of the Gothic look. You still have the transfer. You start to get flow blue and flow mulberry. So instead of having the crisp, clean lines that you saw earlier in transferware, what you get is they intentionally are making those lines blurry. Why? I don't know. They thought it was cool. It looks pretty cool.
Watercolor effect.
A watercolor effect? I don't know. Maybe, I just don't know. But this, it's not popular for very long, but if you go to an antique shop, I guarantee you will find flow somewhere. It was very popular, and because it's made out of ironstone, it's a little bit more durable, therefore more of it sticks around. And then you get some of these, we call Japanese amari sort of prints, which are copies of Japanese porcelains, but they're often made on ironstone. And I see a lot of this amari stuff when I go into museums, pioneer museums and things. They'll have, I don't know where they're getting all these, but they have collections of amari. I've never ever seen a piece of Japanese amari in an archaeological context. Caitlin, have you ever seen anything?
No, never seen it.
Yeah, and sometimes people call that gaudy Japanese, but let's call it amari. And then the last ceramic type that I'm going to talk about today is semi-porcelain. It comes in the 1890s. It has a different kind of decoration. Instead of having those nice underglaze transfer prints, most of the time these are what we call decalcomania. So it's basically they put a sticker on it, a fancy sticker. And so you have a very, very highly detailed, often floral decoration, but it's applied after the glaze. So if you run your fingernail over it, you can, again, like the earlier stuff that was overglazed, you can sort of feel that it goes, it's not completely smooth. And oftentimes in archaeological contexts, the decal will be completely removed, and all you can see is sort of the ghost line of where that decal was. This stuff, when you get a piece of it, I don't know how many of you, will be able to relate to this, but to me, the inside of this looks sort of like a broken toilet bowl, like that really fine, compact, hard ceramic that you can hardly see any graining at all. It's almost uniform all the way through. That's kind of what semi-porcelain looks like when it's broken. The key here is that semi-porcelain postdates what the S&Gs say has cultural heritage value or interest. So if you have a site that has a lot of semi-porcelain and a slight bit of ironstone, but most of it's semi-porcelain with decalcomania or overglazed decoration, you can make the argument that the S&Gs don't apply. It doesn't need to go on to further stages of excavation. And together with clear glass and things like that, that's how you start to build the context of your site. And here's some vessel forms, and you can see what I mean here by the central gravy boat here. You can see how detailed that decoration is. That's not a transfer print anymore. That is decalcomania. It's a fancy sticker. And the same over here on the plates. And this one's actually marked semi-porcelain and is semi-porcelain, which is rare. There are a few other ceramic types. And I see that we're running short on time, but I think we're going to do this. Yellowware comes in 1840s, 1900s. Mostly, I would say 1850s, 1860s. We call it yellowware because on the break, it's pretty yellow. It's sort of a creamy color. It's a heavier ceramic. It's not a tableware in most cases. It's going to be a service vessel or a baking vessel. They also have lots of different kinds of decoration. Factory slip, which we talked about earlier, and this example here is sort of a Rockingham. So it's sort of a mottled browny yellow. And like this piece here is highly decorative, okay? So it was meant for the table. That thing is fancy as heck. But there are some very simple things, and it also comes in sort of chamber pots and other things that we see around. Yellowware was largely manufactured on the US East Coast. Here's some fancy and not so fancy. There's a baking dish on the left, and there's a very fancy fern decoration chamber pot. And where is that chamber pot from, Caitlin? Do we know the site?
I think it's from the Toronto Hospital.
I think so too. So you can see
nothing but the best for our hospital patients.
Exactly. And that's a very fancy chamber pot. I would be pleased to use that. That is delightful. Now, I have a little heart on this one because this ceramic is my favorite. Up until now, we've been talking about ceramics that have been imported. They've been produced en masse in England, mostly, and then imported. This stuff, coarse red earthenware or buff earthenware, was made by people in Upper Canada, often in little part-time kilns. These are people who worked as farmers in the summer and then worked as potters in the winter. It started with some Pennsylvania Dutch. They came up, they brought their traditions with them, but also their English and Irish and Scottish potters. There's French potters as well. But this stuff speaks to me because not only is it locally made with local clays, with local people, local artisans, but they're also making vessels that women used in the kitchen to meet the needs of their family and to, produce some surplus so they had some money. This stuff is great. This stuff is often overlooked because it's not shiny and white and exciting, but I disagree. I think it's amazing. It comes in, usually for us, we see a lot of very standardized forms. Crocks, bowls, milk pans. So a milk pan, you bring the milk in, put it in the pan, let it sit in a cool place in your kitchen, and then the cream would rise to the top, and then you would move on to making butter, whatever. So these vessels were made, they're used, you can often see lots of use marks on them. They took a beating, and you could go to your potter and you might ask for a specialty vessel as well. So these are things that say a lot about the local people, the local ways of life, and it's a folk tradition, right? These forms are passed down. They're relatively standardized from when we start to see them in the late 1700s until the industry basically dies out around 1900. So these, if you find these things, and they're easy to misidentify as brick fragments or maybe terracotta flower pots, but give it an extra look. They're usually glazed on one side, and this one in particular has a clear glaze on it, which allows the red color to come through. But they can be, earlier ones can be greenish or yellow. They can be dark brown. They can be mottled dark and light brown. They're very pretty, and I think they don't get the attention they deserve. I'm biased though. We did several excavations at the Markham Pottery where we had just tons of this stuff, tons and tons. And I really got a great appreciation for the artisans that worked in the upper Canadian cold making these pots. It's amazing.
Yes, the Markham Museum is the site of huge local pottery. And it's also a wonderful museum.
Exactly. So if you're as excited about this stuff as I am, which clearly, I don't know how many people are that crazy, but go look, it's amazing stuff. So here are some different vessel types, bowls. The milk pan is in the bottom right. Upper left is sort of a little plate that has slip decoration on it. Slip decoration in Ontario is relatively early. So we see this slip decoration on redware that sort of comes from the Kitchener area. So the early potteries that started out as redware and then eventually became stoneware, like Edie and similar names. They did a lot of this. It's a very German tradition. The English usually, if they did slip, that the slip would be completely covering the plate, so it would have a completely white interior. And then sort of a little pot down here. So it comes in lots of forms, and it comes in stovepipes and all sorts of stuff. If you look in you can find like old advertisements from the 1860s about what these local potters were making. And another interesting thing is these are largely undocumented kilns. So whereas, we've got Spode and we've got Davenport and we can go and find those kilns and we have all sorts of documents, these kilns sort of popped up, worked for a while, disappeared, not really documented, and we don't have many of them archaeologically either. So they're kind of a lost vessel form and a lost kiln sites here and there. I think there might be 5 or 6 kiln sites that have been excavated for redware. I worked in Ireland and we found a lot of redware, and it's the same there too. Those kiln sites were not documented and they sort of disappeared, which speaks to the nature of the folk pottery, right? And I think this is probably our last stoneware, or our last ceramic ware type is stoneware. And I think everybody's probably pretty familiar with stoneware. If you are a collector or you just like to travel in antique shops, you know this, okay? It's started being imported about 1850. So once the railways were built, they could start bringing stoneware clay up from New York State. And then stoneware, because it's thicker, it's is easier to fire, and it's stronger, began to replace redware. So stoneware came into its own, and again, lots of potteries of the German tradition around Kitchener-Waterloo area, and stoneware in general has a salt glaze finish. So it has like an orange peel kind of finish on it. If you feel it, it's slick, but it's kind of bumpy, just like an orange peel. Lots of times we have cobalt decoration as well. Sometimes it can be quite fancy, and other times you get these impressed marks with how many gallons it can hold and things like that. I'm sure many of you understand and can appreciate stoneware. It's everywhere because it's heavy and it lasts. Stoneware sort of lived its heyday, 1880s or so, and then started to peter out at the end of the century when glass canning jars came in. You didn't need these heavy vessels anymore. You could do the technology that enabled you to can in glass, and then refrigeration, of course, as well. started to come in. Here's some examples of stoneware. Now, we do have stoneware earlier on sites in Ontario, but it's imported stoneware. So things like blacking bottles and ink vessels are imported, and they occur prior to Ontario production of stoneware. And a lot of the times it's this stoneware is this sort of browny color, and that's the imported stuff. When you get to the clays that come from New York and are potted in Ontario, it's kind of a grayish brown most of the time. And some ginger beer bottles, and they start getting transfer prints and all sorts of stuff, and fancy. So that is a very quick run through of historical ceramics. And I understand, God, I understand, that is a lot to throw at you in an hour. And I appreciate your patience and your attention. The interesting thing for me is, yes, we need ceramics so that we can understand the dates of our sites, so that we know how to operate under the SNGs. Or we need to know our ceramics. So if we're making, if we're trying to set an 1860s table in our museum, what sort of things are going to be on that table? But for me, it's also thinking about the role that those ceramics played in all the things that are going on globally, because this is just another piece of the global market that's occurring from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to this day. So thinking about how these ceramics change the way we eat, who we eat with, what sort of ceramics are proper for friends and guests, which ones we use in the kitchen, who's making it, who's buying it, where it's going, and what it says about how individuals at the time are interpreting the larger world. You know, there was a time in historical archaeology when we said, okay, transferware ceramics were probably the most expensive ceramics you could buy. Therefore, if you were excavating a site that had a lot of transferware on it, those were probably rich people. And if you had a site that was predominantly the shell edge stuff, so the stuff that just had the color on the outer edge, or some of the hand painted stuff or sponge stuff, that stuff was cheaper to produce. Therefore, those must have been people who were lower on the economic scale, right? We don't really think that anymore because people manipulate the system. People take things and assign their own values to them. They have varying motivations about how and what they're buying and how they're displaying it. So it's an interesting thing to sit and try and tease out why they had the ceramics they did. I mean, I worked on sites in Ireland where these people were evicted during the famine in 1847, and they were documented by the British as being the poorest of the poor. They had nothing. We did the excavation, and they had what would be considered expensive ceramics. So why? How? Why were they choosing to put their limited funds towards that? So that's the sort of thing that interests me about the ceramics and how they function in a social context. And a lot of my research works on that. But to get to that point, you have to understand what the heck you're looking at. And that's hopefully where we've gotten you guys tonight. There's a great website that's run by the Digital Archaeological Archive of Comparative Slavery, so the DAACS. They have a ceramic handbook that's available to look at, and it will go through so many of these ceramic types and decorative types and more. So if you want to get more information about what I talked about tonight, that's a great place to start. It's free. You can go on, poke around, see what's going on. I also mentioned the Transferware Collectors Club, which is interesting if you're into that sort of ceramic type and you want to know, oh, what kind of variety is there? There's some really amazing prints, different kinds of prints that'll just blow your mind. The subjects, it's incredible. And then you can look at Parks Canada, some works of the Kenyans. All the stuff is there for you to check out. There's some really great archaeological examinations of ceramics, of course, because it doesn't matter. Indigenous, historical, we all love ceramics. So I just want to thank all the archaeologists that helped dig up this stuff and the lab staff that has always worked so hard to separate it out, do the analysis, and provide me with a catalog that I can interpret. And I also want to thank Claire Bennett and all of our friends at Halton Region Heritage Services, because without them, this wouldn't exist. I did a Skillshare for them a couple of years ago, and this has sort of grown out of the Skillshare, and Claire has suggested that maybe the OAS would be a great place to bring this again. So thanks to Claire for her encouragement, and thanks to Caitlin for being awesome, and all of you guys for listening. So.